Yeah, gonna get right into it today. You guys are always asking me, well, not always, but some of you ask me consistently. Let me put it accurately. By the way, I'm using my mic system today and my iPhone to film myself. I bought a brand spanking new iPhone, and when I use this, it washes my face out. Are you seeing this? I look like a fucking I look like a monster all the time. Okay, I know. Don't remind me. I know I look like a mess all the time, but when I use the iPhone, it makes me look like I have jaundice or something. Like, look, those of you concerned, I do not have jaundice. My vitamin intake is excellent. I am very regular. No health issues to report. So if you're concerned about jaundice, I'm fine. I'm getting all the vitamins I need. But yeah, I just look different. But I sound better when I use the mic. And it's hot outside and I have fans going. So that's when I have to use the mic. Anyway, sorry for the washed out monstrosity face. Get used to it. You guys sometimes will ask me what some of my true desert island records are. What are truly some of my favorite albums? I'm going to talk about one right now. It is called Incunabula from Autechre. By the way, that's how you say their name. It's not Autechre, it's not Autechre, it's not Autechre, it's Autechre. And why do I say this? Because the band themselves pronounce it that way. But I don't think they give a shit either way how you pronounce it. So go ahead and pronounce it any way you want. But technically, the correct way to say their name is Autechre. So, again, it doesn't matter. Let me paint the scene for you because I feel like I always hesitate to talk about groups like Aphex Twin and Autechre and any of those early Warp groups that, you know, ended up forming the way Warp sounds and ended up forming Warp as a label. You know, those early bands that made Warp what it is. And I've said this before, I feel like Warp is a label that's kind of lost its way a little bit. They don't have much of an identity anymore. The only identity they have is the bands that helped form what they are today, like Aphex and Autechre and Plaid and Black Dog and Speedy J and Nightmares on Wax, you know, LFO. In my opinion, the best Warp band, you know, back when they had an identity. Boards of Canada, although not so much Boards of Canada. Boards of Canada came out on Scam first. I'm talking, okay, the other band's way more than Boards of Canada. You guys get my drift. You old Warp heads, you know what I'm talking about. But Incunabula has an extremely special place in my heart, and I'll try to explain why. And I'll try to do it expediently so. I don't want to go on and on and on with this video. I want to keep it relatively short because there's so much discourse and commentary about Autechre out there that I just feel like I'm filling the void with a bunch of bullshit, and I don't ever want to do that for you guys. I want to just tell my personal experience with an album and then go away forever. But I'll try to paint the picture for you. Incunabula came out, I want to say, in the fall of 93. I had just turned 21. Up until that point, the previous 3 or 4 years, I was obsessed with electronic music. I was obsessed with groups like Aphex Twin, Black Dog, Plaid, Andy Weatherall. I'm trying to think. Carl Craig was another one that I was hugely into. Underworld. It was. It's hard to explain what an exciting, fertile, frontiers-like time it was. You have to remember that in the early 90s, the internet was not around yet. I mean, it was, but nobody was using it. Home computers weren't in every single home. When you bought a record, that's all you had to go on. That's the only basis you had to rate something. You didn't have the internet to look at some other view. You didn't have YouTube to go listen to it first. You had a record in your hand. You didn't know anything about the band. You might not know anything about the label. You just had a record. And you put it down on your turntable and you drop the needle and you listen to it. And you let it affect you. You had no other extraneous outside noise influencing the way you heard shit like you do today. It's extremely hard to explain this difference to younger people who grew up in our current times, where you get to listen to everything a million times before you actually buy it, if you buy it. Where you can go to Wikipedia and read inaccurate details about people's lives. You can go to YouTube and see countless assholes like myself talking about music. You had one thing. You had a record. And that's what Incunabula will always represent to me personally, is that time in the early 90s where I bought so many records and I was DJing all the time and I was getting records from the record pools and the record labels, and I had all this shit to dig through and decipher. It was all here. It wasn't anywhere else. I had to make sense of all of this shit up here. I had no other extraneous noise affecting the way I heard music. Nothing. So when Incunabula came out, and I set the stage as to what I was listening to then. I mean, Aphex Twin had a couple of records out. He had Analog Bubble Bath. He had Selected Ambient Works. He had Didgeridoo. Black Dog had those early singles that they had put out. Plaid had Mavuki that came out. Carl Craig had a number of 12 inches that had come out. Nightmares on Wax had some stuff. LFO had their first album that had been released called Frequencies. They had a number of singles. So there was a lot of stuff, at least with Warp and that whole scene, that I was listening to and usurping and just trying to soak it all in. And it was a lot. It was a lot of brilliant shit. And I'm not talking about all of the other just random 12 inches that I had in my collection. It was a very exciting time to be into music and to be that age. You know what I mean? When you're in your late teens, early 20s, it's a very fertile time for music for that person. You're soaking everything up. Everything's new. But in this case, this music was truly new. I think an 18-year-old, when they're hearing music today, they could go listen to Billie Eilish and it would be brand new to them because they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. They don't know. They don't have anything to base it on. They have no history. But to be hearing music that truly was revolutionary, you didn't know that at the time. We know that in hindsight now. But nothing sounded like this music. So I was hearing music that was truly original. It wasn't because I mean, it was because I was clueless. I didn't have any frame of reference. But it also happened to be that this music was truly revolutionary. People hadn't heard stuff like this before. So it was just a very exciting time for music. So Incunabula came out, and I only had two experiences with Autechre up to that point. I had that first AI compilation, which I know is legendary now. But remember, it wasn't legendary back then. That record came out on Warp, and people like myself heard it, and I had some friends that heard it, and we all loved it. A lot of us, that's how we were introduced to bands like Autechre and Aphex Twin and The Orb. You know, The Orb's on there, and it's an amazing compilation. And Speedy J is on there. I mean, I think in the world of electronic music, it might be the greatest ever. I think a lot of people feel that way, and I wouldn't argue. It's a brilliant comp. I had that. I think the track, it's called Eggshell, right? Autechre's track. And then I had one other 12-inch called Cavity Job, which is like an early kind of drill and bass record. It's an early jungle record, really. And that's what inspired Autechre from the beginning anyway, was electro and all of its facets and avenues and things like that. You know, Autechre were B-boys. You know, that's who they were. And they took that aesthetic, that aesthetic of always trying something new and try to shake shit up, and they applied it to their music. And so that was my frame of reference with Autechre. I had Cavity Job and I had Artificial Intelligence. That was it. I had a couple of tracks in which to go from when it came to Autechre. Incunabula came out, and I can still remember the first time I listened to this record. I bought I still have it to this day. It's on silver wax, like a silvery colored wax. I will say the pressing isn't great. In fact, if you want to have this record on vinyl, I know they reissued this on black vinyl in the last decade or so. I would recommend you actually get that. I wouldn't be so concerned about trying to fish out that original silver vinyl pressing. It really doesn't sound all that good. It's not terrible. I don't think any of those colored vinyl pressings sounded good. I'm talking about those AI series records like Polygon Window and Black Dog and B12 and Fuse and Speedy J. Those all came out on colored vinyl. I wouldn't recommend you get any of those, really. None of them really sound that good. But if you don't buy vinyl, you don't have to care. When I listened to Incunabula for the first time, and I mean this very sincerely, my entire world opened up. It was one of those life-changing moments. I had never heard anything remotely like this record. It was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had listening to a record the first time. To this day, it gives me chills just to think about the album. Incunabula will always be my favorite Autechre album. Now, I know a lot of people who got into Autechre later. You have the benefit of hindsight, so you can make arguments that, well, what they're doing later is way more revolutionary than what they did early on. You weren't around early on, so you don't get to make statements like, I mean, you can make statements like that, but you're going to be incorrect. The benefit of being old enough and alive in the fall of 1993 is that you got to hear Incunabula the day it came out. And to this day, I have not had more than 10 experiences in my life where I was listening to music that truly changed the way I approach thinking about music. I'm not talking about the music itself, but just thinking about how music can come across to another human being. It is that important to me. Incunabula represented something so new, so revolutionary, so beautiful and gorgeous that I can't explain it in words. It was a record that hit me in the right time of my life. The timing was perfect. The music was perfect. The guys in the group in Autechre, perfect in what they wanted to deliver to their listeners. Everything aligned. And as you get older, you realize that those moments are so exceedingly rare. Very rare. You got to be a certain age and everything's got to line up. The stars have to align. Incunabula is undoubtedly and unreservedly one of those moments for me. To this day, I listen to Incunabula and it is a perfect listening experience. It will never get old to me. I don't care what any Autechre fan says. You can have your favorite Autechre album, and that's great. And I love Autechre. I love their later stuff. Their most recent stuff is fantastic. I mean, when I think of Autechre albums, there's really only one album I've never really enjoyed. It's Cornfield. I know people that's their favorite Autechre album, but it doesn't matter. My favorite Autechre stuff is their early stuff. Their first three albums, really. Incunabula, Amber, and Tri-Repete. Don't even get me started. I'll talk about those albums in another video, but when it comes to Incunabula, words fail me. I've tried to blurt out as much verbal diarrhea as I can about what this record means to me, but I was listening to it the other day, and it just reminded me how much I adore this record, how much it opened up the gateways of what's possible in art, not just music, but art. Music did not sound like this when it came out in 1993. Incunabula is a nuclear bomb going off and decimating everything else in its path in here, for me. It is that special to me. It was a total life changer, a total game changer. It changed everything about the way I think about art and music. It is that important to me. Tracks like Bike and 444, I'm not going to name off tracks. I mean, the whole fucking album is brilliant. Absolutely gorgeous, beautiful stuff by a couple of unbelievably inspired people. If Autechre were ever to watch this video, thank you guys. Seriously, you guys have changed my life for the better in every possible way. When it comes to electronic albums, if I had to make a top 5 list, Incunabula would absolutely be in there. Of all of the albums and genres I talk about on my channel, Autechre Incunabula beats them all. This might be my favorite record I've talked about on this channel. The LFO records come close. Those are right up there with it. It's hard, it depends on the day. Those LFO records, I mean, those mean a lot to me. But Incunabula is right there. It is such a glorious experience for me to listen to this because it does take me back to that time that's lost now. I've heard so much music in my life, and I can't remember the last time I heard music where I was like, what is this? Okay, I have to reshift everything I think about when it comes to music. I thought I knew what music was, and now I don't. Now my world is turned upside down. That's part of getting old, right? Like, you have those moments when you're young and you're never going to recapture that feeling again. It could be music, it could be love, it could be anything. You don't know in that moment because you're young. You haven't had any experience yet. But as you get older, you look back at those moments and you're like, oh shit, that's what it was. And I might never have that again. And that's what Incunabula represents to me psychologically. It's going back to that moment of knowing that the world is a huge place where anything's possible. Things that I thought I understood, but now don't have any understanding of. Incunabula was that stepping stone for me to understand that the world is a big, beautiful place, and I might not ever understand certain things. But one thing I do understand now that I'm older is that I might never have that first listen of Incunabula moment ever again. It's a beautiful record. You should listen to it if you've never heard it. And if you have heard it, go listen to it again. And pick up the Bass Cadet box set too. I want to mention that. There's one single that came from the album. It's called Bass Cadet. It's like well, at least the copy I have, it's a box set. It has 3 10-inches in it. And it has some remixes. Beaumont Hannett does a remix. Beaumont Hannett, if you don't know that name, you should. Autechre does a smattering of remixes. Go pick up the Bass Cadet single. I think it came out in the US on one single 12-inch, I think. It might have come out on Wax Trax. But in the UK, it came out on this triple 10-inch box set. Pretty cool. But it's about Incunabula here. Forget electronic music. It is one of the great album experiences in our lifetime. That's how I think about it. Go listen to it. Until next time, bye.